Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and with party conference season underway, the SNP have kicked things off with a motion on the pursuit of the next Scottish independence referendum being overwhelmingly supported by members, as far as I could tell. But the motion itself seems somewhat ambiguous, with a few accusations flying around that Nicola Sturgeon is being a little bit too cautious. But is she being cautious or is she being clever? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So when it comes to the party conference for the SNP, by far and away the most interesting debate for all of us is surely on when and how another independence referendum is to be held. The how is tricky, of course, because nobody has set out a plan for doing this that takes account of Boris Johnson's unwillingness to accept the electoral mandate that was achieved in the Scottish elections earlier this year. I always hesitate to say democratic mandate because, it's always a bit of a fudge when it comes to a general election. But the fact is that two parties who campaigned for another referendum won a fairly hefty majority when their MSPs are combined, which they sort of have been. So until legal challenges are issued, we won't know the precise route to that next independence referendum. And as I'll talk about later on in the video, that those challenges can't take place until something's set in motion. So we'll leave the how for now and look to the when. So at the conference, a large amount of support for the position of holding the referendum once the health data showed that a full, normal and energetic campaign would be safe. In other words, no campaign would begin until the pandemic emergency is over. But there was a second layer of ambiguity here as well. So when Nicola Sturgeon was asked what level of infections or hospital admissions would meet these criteria, because it talked about being data driven, so what's the data you're looking for? She said that it's not just about the safety of polling stations, but to make sure that the country, which will be facing an important decision about its future, is able to focus properly. Now, you can take that statement along with the motion wording at face value, or you can consider the politics. So I'll consider the politics first. Simple fact of the matter is that it is not in anyone's interest to wait for a time when a country can properly focus on an issue. A country's population is never in a position to do that. What Sturgeon wants is for the timing to be at peak support for independence. Having an ambiguous set of criteria for when that process can begin is always essential in order to start when the political climate is most suitable. Political parties do all this all the time. We'll support this thing when these criteria are met. And the criteria are always a little bit gut feeling-y. Things that I imagine will be playing into this will be the fact that as long as Boris Johnson and his Tory nutters remain in charge, support for independence will increase, if not increase, solidify. That is to say that the people who would not have wanted Scottish independence a few years ago and have now changed their minds, well, something could happen to change their minds back, but the longer Boris Johnson's in, the more that mind will be set, if you see what I mean. It's literally the case that the longer you leave this, the better the chance the SNP have of winning when the referendum is eventually issued. In addition, the more time that's passed since 2014, the fewer credible objections can be raised about, I only just had one, on this issue. By the time you get to 2024, it'll have been 10 years. But it's tricky to determine the timeline here, because it's possible that the Conservatives will trigger yet another early general election. It is also possible that they would lose such an election. Now, it does seem mad that the Conservatives would trigger an early election that they might lose. But the word is that Conservative Party HQ believe that Brexit's going to get worse each year from now. It's going to get less and less popular. As a result, so will they. So as a consequence of that, it might be better to trigger a 50-50 election in 2022 rather than one that they'll probably lose in 2023 and one that they'll definitely, almost certainly lose anyway, in 2024. The latest they can hold it. So having the election next year might not give the Conservatives a good chance of winning, and under normal political circumstances you go, well, they'd be mad to do it then. But it might give them their best chance of winning and being in power in 2026. 2026 is a really crucial year for Brexit. because the trade and cooperation agreement that we have is not set in stone. A load of things are coming up for renegotiation in 2026, and Brexit can go one way or the other. The Conservatives want to be in charge when that happens. So if the Conservatives are no longer in power, then support for independence in Scotland could start to wane a little bit. In fact, the SNP could find themselves wielding far more influence in Westminster than ever before. Politics is completely insane right now, which makes political calculations very difficult because you can't even chart what's going to happen over the next year. This is why, although there are some that are saying Sturgeon is being too cautious, I think I can appreciate the difficult decisions that she has to make. But she is also being quite clever. See, there's a couple of court cases ongoing as a result of the Scottish Government seeking to pass 2 bills in the Scottish Parliament that are not considered within the scope of the Scottish Parliament to pass. I gather that I'm not a legal expert, but I think that the expectation is that the Scottish Government are going to lose these cases. But that's the plan, really. It's a legal loss, but it's for a political win. The argument is that these bills, one of which is a child protection bill that quite frankly should have been adopted nationally across the UK, but that these bills would meet with the approval of people in Scotland. I mean, quite frankly, if you put it to people in England or Wales, they would approve. And that the court judgment is bound to demonstrate how Scotland is being prevented from passing bills that are in people's interest because of Westminster. If only Scotland were independent, it could pass all the laws it wants, will be the narrative. Do you know what? This is a part of the plan to increase the level of support for independence that perhaps too many in the movement don't appreciate, or perhaps think that the level is already high enough to guarantee a win. It's not. Only a fool would want to go to the polls if they get to choose the timing before they are as ready as they can be. You want supports to be the maximum possible. There might also be a concern that people more likely to vote for independence in a referendum would be less keen to put themselves in danger by physically visiting a polling station in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, yeah, you could push postal voting. I would encourage people to sign on for that anyway. But if you take the view that those who are most likely to rock up and vote during a pandemic are those who tend to be more conservative and therefore downplay the dangers, for example, and Conservative voters are not a small minority of Scottish voters by any means, then the SNP would be fighting the campaign in less than ideal circumstances. Yeah, they could still win, but why risk it? That would be politically naive, to say the least. But then let's also take a look at the motion itself at face value. So the wording. The decision should be determined by data-driven criteria about the clear end to the public health crisis, which would allow a full, normal and energetic referendum campaign. Clear end to the public health crisis? So what are the criteria for that then? It just says criteria, it doesn't say what they are. So when will that be? It's quite clear that the crisis is still in full swing now. I don't think anyone could doubt that. Why would we also think it will be any different next year? I see nothing coming that makes me believe that in a year's time we won't still be in a crisis. The SNP's formal policy on the timeline of the referendum states that it will be within the current Parliament. But that just means it will take place before 2026. Now, if the pandemic allows, it is also supposed to be within the first half of the Parliament. That would mean that the SNP's position is that they want to aim to hold it by the end of 2023. But at what point will the pandemic be sufficiently suppressed, in other words, clearly over, or the emergency clearly over, that the campaign can safely begin? Support for this motion was overwhelming, but that might be because it was so ambiguous that it means different things to different people. I mean, I think that's really the idea in many ways. But what happens when a significant chunk of the SNP membership believe that the conditions have been met, but Sturgeon doesn't believe that the political circumstances are quite right? Or is there an argument for beginning the legal process anyway, knowing that it might take time? See, I think the problem is that the Scottish Parliament need a date in order to pass a bill for another referendum. The first step has to be the SNP passing a bill along with the Greens through Parliament. But that needs a date. Until the date is known, the bill can't be prepared. You can't write it. Until the bill is prepared, there can be no legal challenge to it. So as I see it, the timeline is as follows. The COVID health crisis has to abate to the point where life is able to manage with enough of the population confident enough to engage with the political process. That's not just the polling, as Nicola Sturgeon says, it's also the campaigning. Once this happens, a date has to be set for the referendum and a bill sent through the Scottish Parliament. This would have to give at least 6 months after the point at which the pandemic has abated, and realistically may need longer. Then there'll be legal challenges. So then there's the time for the court process, which, won't be a ponderous process. I imagine that will be accelerated due to the urgent nature of the case, but still another month or two, you'd think. All in all, even if, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court sides with the Scottish Parliament, and we won't know until legal arguments are made and heard, because this is unprecedented, then we're still talking at least 2 years before the referendum could take place. And that's being optimistic about the pandemic. That is suggesting that the pandemic will be clearing itself up in a year's time. I'm struggling to be optimistic about the pandemic right now. I sort of feel that, yes, it has to abate at some point. But on the other hand, I look at it and I think, I'm not really sure how this is happening. We're not really working in a coordinated way, either globally or nationally, quite frankly. But that's what we know now. And that's what I think of it all. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.